My mother-in-law called me a gold digger. She didn't know the house was in my name hides a twist of power, betrayal, and revelation. The first time my mother-in-law called me a gold digger, we were sitting in her living room, sipping tea from delicate china cups that probably cost more than my monthly salary back then. She looked me up and down with that sharp, measuring gaze and smiled in a way that wasn't really a smile. "You're lucky my son has such a generous heart," she said casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. "Not every man would take in someone with so little to offer." Her words stung, but I kept my expression calm. I had already learned that in her house, silence was safer than defense. What she didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the house we were sitting in wasn't hers. It wasn't even my husband's. The papers she proudly displayed on the mantelpiece, the family crest framed in gold, all of it meant nothing. The real deed, the one stored safely in my lawyer's office, carried my name. I had bought this house 2 years before I even met her son. The down payment had been the result of sleepless nights, double shifts, and sacrifices that no one in their world of easy inheritance and business dinners would ever understand. But I never said a word. Not then. Not even when she continued her little speech about women who marry for comfort. What I did instead was smile politely, sip my tea, and let her believe every poisonous assumption. Because I knew the truth had more weight when revealed at the right time. That afternoon was the beginning of everything, the simmering tension, the whispered comments, the deliberate humiliations. And as much as it hurt in the moment, I also knew, one day, the house itself would speak for me. The humiliations only multiplied after that first tea. At family dinners, she would make sure to emphasize how fortunate I was to have married into stability. My father-in-law would nod in quiet agreement, and my husband, caught between us, would just keep eating in silence. Once during a holiday toast, she raised her glass and said, "To women who know how to marry wisely, even if they don't bring much else to the table." Laughter followed, not from cruelty perhaps, but from habit, from people too used to her sharp tongue. I smiled, pretending not to notice. Inside, though, every word landed like a stone I carried in my chest. But the truth was, I was not surviving on anyone's money. The house, the one she proudly showcased during family gatherings, with its sprawling garden and high ceilings, had been my dream long before it became her stage. I had walked through its empty rooms years ago, imagining where I'd put my bookshelves, where I'd host friends, where I'd finally feel safe. When the bank handed me the keys, I cried in the car for 20 minutes before I could even drive home. That day was mine. No one gave it to me. I earned it. Yet here I was, listening to her claim the walls as proof of her son's success, proof that I was just another woman clinging to his achievements. Sometimes, as I washed dishes in that same kitchen, I wondered what would happen if I simply told them. If I pulled out the deed and placed it on the table between the soup and the wine. But I didn't. Not yet. Because part of me wanted to understand why she needed so badly to see me small. And another part of me was waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came closer during a Sunday lunch. She had invited some of her friends, elegant women in pearls and silk scarves who spoke about art galleries and their children's private schools as if they were discussing the weather. I was serving dessert when one of them asked politely, "So, dear, what do you do?" Before I could answer, my mother-in-law cut in. "She doesn't really work," she said with a dismissive wave. "Just a little hobby, isn't it? My son takes care of everything important." Her friends smiled, some sympathetically, others knowingly, as if my role had been confirmed. I placed the cake slices gently on the table, but my hand trembled. Not from shame, no, I had stopped feeling ashamed long ago, but from the pressure of holding back. Because in truth, my so-called hobby was the consultancy business that paid off the final mortgage installments on this very house. It was the business that had me traveling for meetings, not vacations, and negotiating contracts with people her son would never even dare approach. But in her version of the story, I was a pretty ornament her son had rescued. Later that evening, when everyone had left, I walked through the house alone. I let my fingers trail across the wooden banister, the one I had chosen from a catalog when the house was still under renovation. I paused by the large bay window, the one I had dreamed of reading by. Everything here was mine, and yet in their eyes, I was borrowing it. I realized then that silence was no longer strength. Silence was permission, and I was done giving it. The next confrontation was inevitable, and I already felt it coming, like a storm pressing against the windows of my own home. The storm finally broke at a family gathering meant to celebrate my husband's promotion. The house was full of laughter, glasses clinking, the smell of roasted lamb filling every corner. And then, as always, came her turn to speak. She tapped her glass with a fork and stood, her voice carrying across the room. "I must say, my son has done so well for himself. This beautiful house, this wonderful life, all thanks to his hard work." Her eyes slid to me, sharp and gleaming. Of course, not everyone can contribute equally. Some are simply lucky to marry into the right family. The room chuckled, a few guests shifting uncomfortably, but no one contradicted her. I stood very still, my hands resting on the table, my heart pounding. And then, without planning it, without rehearsing it, I heard my own voice cut through the noise. "That's interesting," I said evenly, "because the deed to this house doesn't have your son's name. It has mine." The laughter died instantly. Forks clattered against plates. My husband's head snapped toward me, his expression frozen between shock and something else. Was it pride or fear? My mother-in-law blinked, as if I had spoken in another language. "What did you say?" she asked, her tone suddenly brittle. I stood, my legs steady now, and repeated, "The house is mine. I bought it before I ever met him. Every brick, every tile, every window you admire, I paid for it." A silence so heavy fell across the room that even the ticking of the clock on the mantel felt deafening. Her face paled, then flushed, the color rising like fire. For the first time since I had known her, she had no ready words. And in that silence, I felt something shift, like chains falling quietly to the floor. The silence stretched, broken only by the nervous cough of one of her friends. My husband reached for his glass, but didn't drink. He just stared at me, as if seeing me properly for the first time. My mother-in-law's lips trembled before she found her voice. "That's impossible. My son, he provides for you. He told us." I cut her off gently, my voice calm but firm. "He provides for our marriage, yes. But this house was mine long before we became a couple. I worked for it. I sacrificed for it. And I never said a word, because I didn't need to prove myself to anyone." Her friends shifted in their seats, whispering. One of them even looked at me with something like admiration. My mother-in-law, though, was crimson with fury and humiliation. "You've been deceiving us," she hissed. I shook my head. "No, you deceived yourself. You wanted to believe I was a gold digger because it was easier than admitting your son married a woman who doesn't need him for money." For a moment, I thought she might actually throw her glass at me. Instead, she sank slowly into her chair, her shoulders stiff, her eyes refusing to meet mine. I sat down too, my heart still racing, but my voice steady. "I didn't plan to say this tonight, but I won't sit quietly anymore while you insult me in my own home." The words hung in the air. My home. And for the first time, everyone seemed to understand exactly what that meant. The rest of the evening unraveled like a badly staged play. Her friends excused themselves one by one, murmuring polite goodbyes, their eyes darting between me and my mother-in-law as if they had witnessed something scandalous. The dining room, once buzzing with chatter, now echoed with uneasy silence. My husband finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice wasn't angry, just stunned. I met his gaze and said simply, "Because it never mattered to me, until she made it matter." He lowered his eyes, ashamed, perhaps realizing how many times he had let his mother's words wound me without stepping in. When the guests were gone, she cornered me in the kitchen. Her perfume, too strong, too sweet, clung to the air as she hissed, "Do you think this makes you better than me? Owning a house doesn't buy you respect in this family." I turned slowly, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Respect isn't bought. It's earned. And tonight, you lost more of it than I ever could." Her jaw tightened, her eyes blazing with something between hatred and fear. For the first time, she didn't look like the woman in control. She looked cornered. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. My husband's steady breathing beside me felt like a wall between us. I had defended myself, yes. But I also knew this was not the end. In families like his, truth is never enough. There would be whispers, power plays, new humiliations disguised as tradition. But something inside me had changed. I was no longer waiting for the right moment. I had found my voice, and I wasn't planning to give it back. The following week, I noticed the shift. Subtle but undeniable. When we gathered again for Sunday lunch, the usual sharp comments were absent. My mother-in-law sat stiffly at the head of the table, her smile stretched too thin, her eyes avoiding mine. Instead, she focused on bragging about her bridge club, about the new renovation she wanted to do in her own house, about anything that didn't involve me. It was almost comical. She had built her entire identity on putting me down, and now that weapon had been taken away. But it wasn't just her. My father-in-law, who had always chuckled along with her remarks, now studied me differently, cautious, maybe even respectful. My husband, too, seemed changed. He opened doors for me, filled my glass before his mother's, small gestures that didn't go unnoticed. And she noticed. Oh, she noticed. At one point, she leaned across the table and said sweetly, "You know, it's unusual for a woman to keep such things secret from her husband. Some might call that distrust." I smiled. "Or independence," I replied calmly, holding her gaze. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. She pushed her plate away and excused herself early, retreating upstairs with the dignity of a queen who had just lost her crown. That night, my husband whispered in bed, "I'm proud of you." It was the first time he had ever said those words. And though part of me wanted to believe him, another part wondered if pride alone would be enough to change the foundation of this family. Because respect once taken for granted is never given back easily. The weeks that followed became a quiet battle. She no longer insulted me openly, but the tension was everywhere, in the way she pursed her lips when I spoke, in how she corrected me about the smallest details, in the icy silences that filled the room whenever the word home came up. One evening, she invited extended relatives for dinner without asking me. When I returned from work, the house was full of people I barely knew, laughter echoing through my living room. She stood by the fireplace, welcoming them as though she were the lady of the house. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked straight to the kitchen, pulled out the drawer where I kept important papers, and returned with the framed deed I had quietly hung on the wall a few days earlier. "Before dinner," I said softly, "I think everyone should know whose home they're in." The room fell silent as eyes turned toward the document, my name, bold and undeniable, beneath the words owner of property. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My husband's cousin let out a low whistle. Someone whispered, "So it's hers." My mother-in-law froze. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of a chair. She tried to laugh, but the sound broke in her throat. I set the frame gently back in place. "Now," I said, turning to the guests with a smile, "please, make yourselves comfortable." The rest of the evening was awkward for her, but liberating for me. For the first time, I felt like the house itself had spoken, its walls echoing the truth she could no longer twist. And though she didn't say a word to me that night, her silence was louder than any insult she had ever thrown. After that dinner, the balance shifted in ways I hadn't expected. The relatives who once nodded along with her sly remarks now greeted me warmly, asking about my work, about the choices I had made for the house. They saw me differently because they finally knew the truth. But the change cut deeper at home. My husband seemed conflicted. He admitted one night, "I didn't realize how much you've carried on your own. It makes me feel small." I took his hand. "It was never meant to make you small. It was just my life before you." Still, the cracks were showing. He had always lived in his mother's shadow, seeking her approval, fearing her judgment. Now he saw that I didn't need it, that I had carved my own path. And in his eyes, I could tell he wondered if he could ever step out of hers the way I had. As for my mother-in-law, she retreated into silence, but not surrender. I caught her watching me sometimes, her gaze hard and calculating. She had lost a battle, yes, but not the war she carried inside her pride. One afternoon, when the house was quiet, she approached me in the garden. Her voice was low, sharp like a knife. "You may own these walls, but you'll never own this family. Don't forget, you're still an outsider." I looked at her, the woman who had spent years belittling me, and I realized something. She wasn't fighting for respect. She was fighting for relevance. And that was a war she could never win. Her words lingered, bitter as the winter air, but they no longer pierced me. For years, I had let her define my worth, shape how others saw me, even how I saw myself. But standing there in the garden, with the house behind me, the house I had built my future on, I understood something simple and powerful. I didn't need her approval. Over time, the family adapted. Some still treated me cautiously, as if afraid I might reveal more secrets hidden in plain sight. Others began to respect me, not just for owning the house, but for enduring years of quiet humiliation with grace until I chose to speak. My husband slowly started to untangle himself from his mother's grip. It wasn't easy, old habits die hard, but he saw the strength in me, and maybe, just maybe, he found the courage to claim his own. As for her, my mother-in-law, she never apologized. Not once. Pride wouldn't allow it. But she also never called me a gold digger again. She avoided the subject entirely, as though silence could rewrite history. I let her keep her silence, because I no longer needed to fight. I had already won. And every time I walked through those doors, hearing them close behind me with the certainty of belonging, I smiled. The house wasn't just mine on paper. It was mine in truth, in dignity, in the quiet way I had taken back my place. And no one, not even her, could take that away again.